Everyone in the room laughed when Clara stepped through the golden doors of the Sterling Charity Gala. Her dress was simple, her shoes were worn, her hands still carried the faint marks of hard work, and beside the city's richest families, she looked like she had wandered into the wrong world. Whispers followed her every step. Who invited her? She must be one of the servants. Look at that dress. Clara lowered her eyes, clutching the small envelope against her chest. She had not come for their approval. She had come to deliver something important, something her late mother had protected for years. Across the ballroom, billionaire Adrian Vale watched in silence. He had seen people flatter him, chase him, lie to him, and smile with empty hearts. But Clara was different. She stood alone beneath the glittering chandeliers, mocked by people who knew nothing about her courage. Then the host made a cruel mistake. With a smirk, he called Clara onto the stage, intending to embarrass her in front of everyone. The laughter grew louder as she walked forward, trembling but unbroken. Adrian was already moving to stop it. But before he could reach her, Clara opened the envelope. The entire ballroom fell silent. Inside was a secret no one expected, a truth tied to one of the richest families in the city, a forgotten promise, and a sacrifice that had changed Adrian's life long before he ever knew her name. The laughter vanished. Faces turned pale. And Adrian, staring at the evidence in Clara's hands, realized the poor girl everyone had mocked was the one person who had unknowingly saved him. That night, the girl they had looked down on became the woman no one could ignore. For several seconds, no one moved. The grand ballroom, which moments earlier had been filled with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of crystal glasses, felt frozen under the weight of Clara's revelation. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. A violinist held her bow in midair, her eyes fixed on the papers trembling in Clara's hands. Adrian reached the foot of the stage, his expression unreadable. He looked from Clara's face to the old photograph she had taken from the envelope. It showed a younger woman in a faded nurse's uniform standing beside a hospital bed. In the bed was a boy, pale and thin, but smiling faintly. On the woman's wrist was a bracelet with a tiny blue stone. Clara wore the same bracelet now. Adrian knew that boy. It was him. The memory came back in pieces, like fragments of glass catching light. A white room, rain tapping against the window, a woman humming softly while adjusting his blanket, the smell of lavender soap, a gentle voice telling him, "You're stronger than you think, little lion." Little lion. No one had called him that since childhood. He had never known the woman's name. His family had told him she was only one of many nurses who had cared for him after the accident, but the face in the photograph was impossible to forget. He had dreamed of it for years without understanding why. Clara's voice shook, but it carried through the room. My mother's name was Elena Whitmore. She worked for the Vale family 22 years ago. She was there the night Adrian Vale was brought into St. Jude's Hospital after the bridge accident. She stayed with him when his own family was trapped overseas by the storm. She gave testimony about what really happened that night, and she protected this evidence because she believed the truth would matter one day. A murmur moved through the room. Adrian's uncle, Victor Vale, who stood near the champagne fountain with a glass in his hand, went stiff. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile polished by decades of business deals. To most people, he was the generous chairman of the Vale Foundation, the man hosting the gala in honor of his late brother. But now, for the first time all evening, his confidence cracked. Clara noticed. So did Adrian. Victor set his glass down with careful fingers. "This is absurd," he said, his voice smooth but sharp. "Adrian, surely you don't intend to entertain this little performance." Clara flinched at the word little, but she did not step back. Adrian's gaze remained on the photograph. "Let her speak." The three words changed the room. People who had laughed at Clara now looked away, ashamed or afraid. Some had known Adrian since he inherited Vale Industries at 28 and turned it into one of the most successful companies in the country. He was not a man who raised his voice. He did not have to. When Adrian Vale spoke quietly, even powerful people listened. Clara drew another paper from the envelope. Its edges were worn, folded, and unfolded so many times that the creases had become nearly white. "My mother wrote this before she died," Clara said. "She told me not to open it unless something happened to her. For years, I thought she meant an illness, but then she got sick, and before she passed, she begged me to bring it here. She said the Sterling Gala was the only place where every person who needed to hear the truth would be gathered in one room." Her eyes moved to Victor. She said a promise had been broken. Adrian slowly climbed the steps to the stage. He did not take the letter from Clara. He stood beside her, close enough that she no longer looked alone, but not so close that he crowded her. For a moment, Clara saw not a billionaire, not the man whose face appeared on magazine covers, but someone searching for something that had been taken from him long ago. She unfolded the letter. The handwriting was delicate but uneven, as if written by a weakening hand. "My daughter," Clara read, "if you are reading this, then I have run out of time. I wanted to protect you from the truth, but silence has become its own kind of danger. Years ago, I cared for a boy named Adrian Vale. He was kind even through pain. His father, Thomas Vale, was kind too. He promised that if I kept safe what I saw, if I guarded the records until Adrian was old enough to decide for himself, he would protect our family in return. But Thomas died before he could fulfill that promise, and the people who feared the truth buried everything." Victor's jaw tightened. Adrian's hands curled at his sides. Clara continued, her voice growing steadier. "The accident was not an accident. Thomas Vale had discovered that company money meant for hospitals and shelters was being stolen. He planned to expose the theft after the Foundation Gala. That same night, his car was forced off the bridge. Adrian survived because a passing clinic van stopped, and I pulled him out before the car sank deeper into the riverbank mud. He was barely breathing. I gave him emergency care until help arrived." A gasp broke from somewhere near the front. Adrian stared at the paper. For years, he had been told that emergency responders had saved him. He had believed the vague story because he had been too young to remember the full truth. His father had died in the crash, and all Adrian had been given afterward were condolences, lawyers, and a house full of adults who spoke in whispers. The word accident had followed him his whole life. Now it sounded like a lie. Clara paused. The room blurred for a moment, and she was no longer standing beneath chandeliers. She was 9 years old again, sitting on the cracked kitchen floor of the small apartment she shared with her mother. Rain had leaked through the ceiling into a cooking pot. Elena was mending Clara's school dress by lamplight, the blue stone bracelet flashing on her wrist. "Never be ashamed of what we don't have," Elena had said. Clara had looked down at the patches on her sleeves. "People at school laughed today." "People laugh when they don't know how to understand something," her mother replied gently. "But one day, you may walk into a room where they laugh, and you must remember that truth does not need expensive shoes." At the time, Clara had not understood. Now she did. She read the next lines. "I kept copies of Thomas Vale's records hidden in a safe deposit box. They show who moved the money, who signed the false reports, and who arranged for his car to be followed that night. If I fail to bring them forward myself, Clara must. She is braver than she knows." Clara's throat tightened. She had heard her mother call her brave in small ways. Brave for working after school, brave for smiling when bills piled up, brave for holding Elena's hand during the worst nights of her illness. But this was different. This was bravery her mother had prepared her for without ever saying why. Victor laughed once, a dry sound with no humor in it. "This is ridiculous," he said. "A dead woman's letter and an old photograph. Is this what we consider proof now?" Clara reached into the envelope again and removed a small silver key taped to the back of a bank receipt. "My mother left the safe deposit box number 2. Victor's face changed before he could stop it. It was quick, almost invisible, but Adrian saw it. So did the reporters near the side wall. They had been invited to cover charity donations and red carpet gowns. Now their cameras turned toward Victor Vale. Adrian extended his hand gently. "May I?" Clara gave him the key. Their fingers brushed, and Adrian noticed how cold her hand was, not from fear alone, from exhaustion, from years of carrying something too heavy by herself. "Security," Adrian said, without taking his eyes off Victor. "No one leaves this room until the authorities arrive." Victor's mask slipped completely. "You cannot do that." "I can," Adrian said, "and I have." Two guards stepped toward the doors. People began whispering faster now, not cruelly this time, but with the hungry panic of those who had witnessed a powerful man cornered by a girl they had dismissed minutes earlier. Clara lowered the letter. The strength that had carried her onto the stage began to fade. Her knees felt weak. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but in every version she had been alone. She had expected Adrian to doubt her. She had expected Victor to laugh. She had expected to be thrown out before anyone listened. She had not expected Adrian to stand beside her. "Miss Whitmore," he said softly, turning to her, "did your mother ever tell you why she waited?" Clara swallowed. "She tried before," Clara said. "When I was 15, she wrote to the Vale Foundation. A week later, she lost her job at the clinic. Then our apartment was searched while we were out. Nothing was stolen, but everything was moved. She knew someone had found out she still had the records." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. The guilt hit him with such force that he almost stepped back. While Clara and her mother had been threatened, he had been growing up inside guarded walls. He remembered tutors, private schools, lonely dinners at a table too long for one boy. He remembered Victor telling him that the world was full of people who would use his grief to get close to his money. Trust family, Victor had always said. But family, Adrian now realized, had been the first cage built around him. When the police arrived, the gala transformed into something unrecognizable. Guests were questioned. Reporters whispered into phones. Victor tried to leave through a service entrance but was stopped by security. His fury returned in polished form, but he could not hide the tremor in his hands. Adrian stayed with Clara through it all. Not because she needed rescuing. He was beginning to understand she had been rescuing others long before he met her, but because the room that had mocked her now wanted pieces of her story, and he would not let them take more than she was willing to give. An officer took the key and letter as evidence after making copies. Clara answered questions carefully, repeating what her mother had told her, explaining where the bank was located, naming the clinic where Elena had worked. Every answer seemed to pull another thread loose from the neat fabric of the Vale family's public history. By midnight, the headlines were already appearing online. Poor girl exposes billionaire family secret at charity gala. Hidden letter points to Vale Foundation scandal. Adrian Vale seen standing beside mystery woman. Clara hated the last one most. She was not a mystery. She was Elena Whitmore's daughter. She was a girl who had washed dishes in restaurants, cleaned offices at dawn, and studied nursing textbooks borrowed from libraries because her mother once told her healing people was the closest thing to touching hope. But to the world, she became the poor girl from the gala. By the time Adrian walked her outside, rain was falling over the city. Clara stopped under the stone awning. For a strange moment, the sound of rain on the street seemed louder than the chaos behind them. "My mother always said rain remembers," she murmured. Adrian looked at her. Clara gave a faint, tired smile. "I know it sounds strange," she said. "Important things happened in the rain. The night she saved you, the night she hid the papers, the night she told me the truth." Adrian stared out at the silver sheets washing over the pavement. A memory stirred again, rain against glass, a woman's voice humming, a blue stone bracelet catching hospital light. "She called me Little Lion," he said. Clara turned sharply. "What?" "When I was in the hospital, I remember it now, your mother called me Little Lion." Tears filled Clara's eyes before she could stop them. Elena had told her bedtime stories about a little lion who got lost in a storm but found his way home because a kind star refused to stop shining. Clara had always thought it was only a story. Now she understood that her mother had been keeping Adrian alive in memory long after the world had forgotten what she had done. "She never forgot you," Clara whispered. "Not once." Adrian's voice was low. "I forgot her. You were a child. I grew up with everything," he said, looking at the rain, "and still somehow I was kept from the one truth that mattered." Clara did not know what to say. She had spent years imagining Adrian Vale as distant and untouchable, a name carved into buildings, a face beside donation checks. She had not imagined grief could live in him so quietly. A black car pulled up. Adrian's driver opened the door, but Clara stepped back. "I can take the bus." Adrian looked at her worn shoes, then at her face. "It's past midnight. I've gone home later." "I'm sure you have," he said. "That doesn't mean you should tonight." There was no pity in his voice. Clara had heard pity often enough to recognize its shape. This was concern, plain and respectful. After a moment, she nodded. The ride through the rain was quiet. City lights stretched across the windows in long golden lines. Clara sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, feeling out of place against the soft leather seats. Adrian sat beside her, staring at the copied letter the police had allowed him to keep. At a red light, Clara noticed something hanging from the rearview mirror, a small brass charm shaped like a lion. "My father gave it to me," Adrian said when he saw her looking. "After the accident, I refused to sleep unless I held it. Victor said I made up the little lion story because I was confused." "He lied to you about even that," Clara said. "Yes," Adrian replied, "he did." The investigation moved quickly after that night. The safe deposit box contained more than a letter. There were financial records, medical notes, a torn piece of Thomas Vale's journal, and a cassette tape so old the police had to find special equipment to play it. On the recording, Thomas spoke in a strained voice about discovering stolen funds and fearing that someone close to him knew too much. One line from the tape spread everywhere. "If anything happens to me, Elena Whitmore knows where the truth is." For days, Clara could not leave her apartment without cameras flashing. Neighbors who had barely nodded before suddenly knocked with food and questions. People from the gala sent apology messages through social media, some sincere, some carefully worded to protect their reputations. The host, who had mocked her, publicly donated money to 3 charities and posted a statement about misjudging a brave young woman. Clara did not answer him. She returned to work at the bakery the next morning. When Adrian found out, he arrived just after sunrise. The bakery smelled of warm bread and cinnamon. Clara was tying an apron around her waist when the bell above the door rang. She looked up and nearly dropped a tray. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Adrian glanced at the flour on the counter and the line of customers staring at him. "Good morning to you too. People will talk. They already do. My boss will panic." A woman in the back peeked through the kitchen door, saw Adrian Vale standing by the pastry case, and immediately vanished again. Clara sighed, too late. Adrian almost smiled. It softened his whole face, making him look younger and less like the untouchable man from television. "I wanted to ask how you were," he said. "I'm working." "That's not an answer." "It's the safest answer." He understood that better than she expected. Work had been Clara's shelter for years. When her mother got sick, Clara worked. When bills arrived, she worked. When grief threatened to swallow the apartment whole, she scrubbed counters until her hands ached. Doing something was easier than feeling everything. Adrian ordered a black coffee he barely touched and sat at a corner table until her break. He did not demand her attention. He did not offer money. He simply waited, ignoring the people pretending not to photograph him. When Clara finally sat across from him, she placed 2 slightly burnt rolls between them. These are the ones we can't sell, she said. Adrian took one. They're perfect. You haven't tasted it. I stand by my statement. She laughed before she could stop herself. It surprised them both. For the first time since the gala, Clara felt like a person instead of a headline. Over the next weeks, Adrian became a steady presence in her life, though never an easy one. His world and hers collided awkwardly. He sent a private security car once after reporters followed her, and she refused to get in until he promised no one would hover outside her door without asking. He offered to pay for her nursing school, and she told him she would not become another charity project for the Vale name. I owe your mother my life, he said. You owe her the truth, Clara replied, not ownership of mine. That answer stayed with him. Adrian had grown used to solving problems with money because money had always been the tool placed in his hand. But Clara made him see that some wounds could not be paid closed. Some debts had to be honored slowly, carefully, with humility. So he changed. He listened. He helped her find a lawyer, not because she was helpless, but because the case against Victor became complicated and dangerous. He arranged for Elena Whitmore's name to be added officially to the hospital record as the first responder who saved Adrian's life. He reopened the Vale Foundation under independent oversight and froze every account connected to Victor until investigators finished their work. And when Clara visited her mother's grave on a grey Sunday morning, she found Adrian standing several feet away, holding white lilies. He had not approached the headstone without her permission. Clara noticed that first. You came, she said. I wanted to thank her, Adrian replied, but I can leave if this should be private. Clara studied him. He looked nervous, almost boyish, with rain misting his dark coat. In his hands, the lilies trembled slightly. My mother would have liked you, she said, but she would have told you your shoes cost too much. Adrian glanced down. She would have been right. Clara smiled sadly and led him to the grave. Elena Whitmore's headstone was simple: loving mother, gentle heart, brave soul. Adrian stood before it in silence for a long time. Clara did not interrupt. She remembered her mother teaching her to make soup from almost nothing, singing old songs while folding laundry, hiding pain behind smiles so Clara could still believe tomorrow might be kinder. She remembered the final night, when Elena had pressed the envelope into her hands with surprising strength. Promise me, Elena had whispered. I don't understand, Clara had cried. You will. Now Clara did. Adrian placed the flowers down. Thank you, he said quietly, for saving me, for protecting the truth, for raising someone stronger than all of us. Clara looked away as tears blurred the grass. Adrian did not touch her. He only stood beside her, silent and steady, and somehow that was enough. Months passed. Victor Vale's arrest came on an autumn morning, just as the first cold wind moved through the city. The charges were serious: fraud, obstruction, conspiracy, and involvement in the cover-up surrounding Thomas Vale's death. Other names fell with his: board members, accountants, former security staff, men and women who had built careers on stolen charity money and buried truth. The trial became national news. Clara testified on the third day. She wore a navy dress borrowed from a neighbor and the bluestone bracelet on her wrist. Reporters packed the hallway outside the courtroom, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy and still. Victor's lawyer tried to make her seem unreliable. Miss Whitmore, you were a child when your mother allegedly told you these stories, correct? Yes. And your family struggled financially. Yes. And now, after making these claims, you have become publicly associated with Mr. Adrian Vale, one of the richest men in the country. Clara saw the trap. Everyone did. Adrian sat behind the prosecution table, his expression tense. He had warned her this might happen. They would try to turn her truth into ambition. They would try to make poverty look like motive. Clara leaned toward the microphone. My mother died with unpaid medical bills, she said. If money were what she wanted, She could have sold those documents years ago. She didn't. She protected them because she believed a boy deserved to know who his father really was, and because she believed stolen charity money meant stolen medicine, stolen shelter, and stolen chances for people who needed help. The courtroom went silent. Then she added, "Being poor does not make a person dishonest. Sometimes it only means honest people paid the price for someone else's greed." The quote appeared across every newspaper the next morning. But the moment that mattered most to Clara happened later, after court ended for the day. She found Adrian waiting in a quiet hallway near a window. Outside, yellow leaves spun across the courthouse steps. "You were incredible," he said. "I was terrified." "I know." She looked at him. "You always say that like fear and courage can stand in the same room." "They can," he said. "You taught me that." Clara felt something shift between them then. It had been shifting for months, quietly and carefully, in bakery visits, courthouse benches, late phone calls about evidence, and silences that no longer felt uncomfortable. She had tried not to name it. So had he. Their lives were still tangled in scandal, grief, and public attention, but beneath all that, something gentle had taken root. It was not the dramatic love people wrote about in headlines. It was smaller at first, and therefore stronger: respect, trust, laughter over burnt rolls, the knowledge that neither had to pretend with the other. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I found this in my father's belongings," he said. "The police returned it after reviewing everything." Clara unfolded the cloth. Inside was an old fountain pen. "My mother gave him that," she whispered. "Yes, there was a note with it." Adrian handed her a folded page. "My father wrote that Alina told him promises should be signed with something that has touched honest hands." Clara laughed through sudden tears. "That sounds like her." "I want you to keep it." "No," she said softly, "it belongs to you." "It belongs to the promise," Adrian replied, "and I think she carried it longer than any of us." Clara closed her fingers around the pen. For a while, they stood together beneath the courthouse window, neither needing to say more. Victor was convicted in winter. When the verdict was read, he did not look at Clara. He looked at Adrian, as if still expecting the boy he had raised in fear to obey him, but Adrian did not lower his eyes. He held Victor's stare until the older man looked away first. Afterward, the city seemed to exhale. The Vale Foundation was rebuilt from the ground up. Hospitals received the funds that had once been stolen. Shelters reopened programs. Scholarships were created for students from low-income families pursuing nursing, medicine, and public service. Adrian named the largest program the Alina Whitmore Promise Fund. Clara argued with him about it for 3 days. "My mother hated attention," she insisted. "She loved helping people," Adrian replied. "She would say it's too much. She would say the money should go where it was always meant to go." That ended the argument. The first ceremony for the fund was held not in a glittering ballroom, but in the courtyard of St. Jude's Hospital. Nurses, patients, students, and families filled the space. There were no crystal chandeliers, no cruel whispers, no polished host looking for someone to humiliate. Clara stood near the back, hoping not to be noticed. Adrian noticed anyway. When he stepped to the microphone, he did not begin with numbers or public statements. He looked at the hospital windows above them, and for a moment he was a boy again, listening to rain and a gentle voice. 22 years ago, he said, a woman named Alina Whitmore saved my life. Then she spent the rest of hers protecting the truth about my father's death. She received no wealth for it, no applause, no protection from the people who should have honored her. But today, her name begins a promise that will outlive every lie told against her. Clara pressed the blue bracelet against her wrist. Adrian continued, "This fund is not charity in the way my family once used that word. It is restitution, it is responsibility, and it is a reminder that dignity does not depend on what someone wears where they live, or how powerful people choose to see them. His eyes found Clara's. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is carrying the truth that can save us all. The crowd applauded, but Clara barely heard it. She remembered the gala, the laughter, the stage, the awful heat of embarrassment rising in her cheeks. She remembered thinking she might collapse before she could read the letter. She remembered Adrian stepping beside her when everyone else stepped away. After the ceremony, he found her near a row of winter roses. "You're hiding," he said. "I'm resting in a less visible location." "That sounds official. I've been around lawyers too much." He smiled. "Your mother's fund received its first 1,000 applications." Clara's eyes widened. Already. Already. She would have cried. "I almost did." "You did," Clara said. Adrian blinked. "You saw that." "Everyone saw that." He laughed quietly, and she loved the sound before she could stop herself from thinking the word. Love. It frightened her less than she expected. Maybe because Adrian had never tried to sweep her into his world like a prize. He had walked toward hers, step by step, learning its narrow hallways, its grief, its stubborn pride. And Clara had learned his too, the lonely mansion, the childhood shaped by lies, the guilt of surviving, the pressure of a name that felt more like a burden than a crown. They were not fairy tale opposites, they were two people marked by the same storm. "Clara," Adrian said, his voice softer now. She looked at him. "There's something I need to tell you, and I don't want the world to make it into something cheap." Her heart began to beat faster. "I don't know when it happened," he said. "Maybe at the gala, when you stood there shaking and still refused to run. Maybe at the bakery, when you made me eat burnt bread and pretended it was a privilege. Maybe when you spoke for your mother in court and made an entire room remember what courage sounded like." Clara's eyes strung. "But I know this," Adrian continued. "I love you, not because of what your mother did for me, not because of what you uncovered. I love you because of who you are when no one is watching, and I don't expect an answer right now. I just needed you to hear it from me before you heard the world guessing." Clara looked at the roses, then at the hospital, then at the bracelet her mother had worn through years of quiet sacrifice. For most of her life, love had meant endurance. It had meant a mother skipping meals so her daughter could eat. It had meant holding on when life offered no guarantees. She had not known love could also feel like someone standing beside you without trying to own your strength. She took a breath. "My mother once told me truth doesn't need expensive shoes," Clara said. Adrian waited. She was right, but apparently it sometimes arrives with a billionaire who doesn't know how to drink bakery coffee. A smile broke across his face. Clara stepped closer. "I love you too." He did not pull her into a grand scene for the watching crowd. He simply took her hand gently, as if it was something precious because it was hers. And Clara, who had once walked into a room full of laughter with nothing but an envelope and a promise, felt the quiet wonder of being seen completely. A year later, the Sterling Charity Gala was held again. Everything had changed. The golden doors remained, the chandeliers still glittered, the city's richest families still arrived in silk, diamonds, and tailored suits, but Victor Vale's portrait had been removed from the entrance hall. In its place hung a photograph of Elena Whitmore in her nurse's uniform, the same photograph Clara had carried in the envelope. Beneath it were the words, "She kept the promise." Clara entered through the same doors she had walked through the year before. This time, no one laughed. Her dress was elegant but simple, deep blue like the stone in her bracelet. Her shoes were new, though she joked they were less comfortable than her old ones. Adrian walked beside her, not ahead of her, not guiding her as if she did not belong, but beside her as if the room had been waiting for her all along. The guests turned. Some looked ashamed, some looked admiring, some looked curious in that hungry way society often looked at people after deciding they were worth noticing. Clara did not lower her eyes. Near the stage, the former host approached her, his face flushed as he cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I owe you an apology, a real one. What I did last year was cruel." Clara studied him. She had imagined this moment many times and thought it would feel triumphant. Instead, it felt smaller than expected. "You do owe me one," she said. He nodded quickly. "I'm sorry." Clara let the words settle. "Then do better when no one important is watching," she said. He lowered his gaze. "I will." Adrian leaned toward her after the man walked away. That was merciful. It was practical. Shame is only useful if it teaches something. "You sound like Alina." Clara touched the bracelet. "Good." Later that night, Clara stepped onto the stage by choice. The ballroom quieted, not from shock this time, but respect. Adrian stood near the front, watching her with the same expression he had worn the night her truth changed his life. Clara looked across the room. A year ago, she had seen only cruel faces, glittering wealth, and doors she had been made to feel unworthy of entering. Now she saw nurses from St. Jude's seated beside executives, scholarship students beside donors, shelter directors beside society women who had once treated charity like a decoration. The room was not perfect, but it was different. "My mother believed promises mattered," Clara began, "not the easy kind, not the kind spoken for applause. She believed in promises kept when keeping them costs something." Her voice did not shake. "She taught me that dignity can survive poverty, grief, and humiliation. She taught me that people who are overlooked are not invisible. They are often the ones holding families together, saving lives quietly, and protecting truths that others are too afraid to face." Adrian's eyes shone. Clara smiled. "Last year I came here with an envelope. Tonight I come with a promise of my own. The Alina Whitmore Promise Fund will expand to every public hospital in the state, supporting nurses, caregivers, and students who serve communities too often forgotten, because my mother was never just part of someone else's story. She was the reason the story could continue." The applause rose slowly at first, then filled the ballroom. Clara looked up at the chandeliers, remembering how their light had once felt cold and merciless. Now it seemed softer, almost like rain turned golden. After the speech, Adrian found her on the balcony. The city stretched below them, alive with lights. A breeze lifted the edge of her dress. "You left the room speechless again," he said. "That's becoming a habit." "A good one." Clara leaned against the railing. "Do you ever think about how close the truth came to disappearing?" "Every day. My mother must have been so tired. She still chose courage." Clara looked at him. "So did you." Adrian shook his head slightly. "I only followed where you led." For a long moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Below, cars moved through the streets like streams of light. Somewhere in the city, a student had just received a scholarship email. A patient rested in a hospital bed, funded by money returned from greed. A mother working a night shift might someday hear Alina Whitmore's name and feel less alone. Clara thought of the little apartment, the leaking ceiling, the rain in the cooking pot. She thought of her mother mending a dress and saying truth did not need expensive shoes. Then she thought of the girl who had walked into the gala trembling but unbroken. That girl had not known the whole story yet. She had not known the billionaire across the room would remember her mother's voice. She had not known laughter could turn into silence, silence into justice, and justice into a future. She had only known she made a promise. And she kept it. Adrian took her hand. Inside the ballroom, Alina's photograph watched over a room that had finally learned her name. And outside, as the first soft drops of rain began to fall, Clara smiled. Because her mother had been right. Rain remembers.